you name it. And so as a result, as time goes on, especially if we're increasing the rate at which we're extracting resources all the time, which we're doing, then that means we get to a point where the cheap, easy stuff is gone. Now that doesn't mean we're about to run out of oil or coal or natural gas or any of these resources. What it does mean is that the era of cheap oil is over. With coal and natural gas, there's somewhat different situations that take a little bit longer to explain. The same principle holds, but let's just stick with oil for a moment. The U.S. was the place where the oil industry got started. We have more experience with oil here in this country than any place else around the world. And we've seen oil production hit a maximum in 1970, and it's been declining generally ever since. We have had a little uptick in the last couple of years, but it's not really significant. And country after country around the world is doing the same thing. Most countries are seeing declining production. Again, not because there isn't any more oil there, but because what's available now is increasingly more expensive to extract. It takes more energy to extract it. The environmental consequences, like with tar sands, for example, are much greater for extraction than was the case with regular conventional oil in the old days. So, the only solution to this problem is to get off of these fuels while we still can. Our problem is that we've created so much infrastructure that depends on, let's say, oil, cars, trucks, planes, boats, highways, all designed for a world of cheap oil. And as oil becomes more scarce and expensive, we're going to be locked into those transport modes with no real alternative. If we're going to have an alternative, we have to start building it before we actually need it. Otherwise, we get caught in a kind of trap of our own making. And that's kind of what we're building, that trap right now.
Yeah, it seems to me that one of the things that would help us out of this trap, if we could really develop some alternative energies, but there's so much standing in the way, especially with government interference through corporate structures. Do you see anything on the horizon with alternative energy helping us out of this? And do you know anything about zero-point energy?
Yeah, there are lots of interesting things going on in the world of alternative energy. Probably the most interesting research is going on in the field of photovoltaics. Of course, PV has been around for a long time, but new materials are being developed, new ways of concentrating the sunlight to improve efficiency. And solar panels have been getting a lot cheaper in recent years. So yeah, there are lots of very exciting new developments. Does that mean there's no problem? Well, unfortunately, no. We still have a problem because renewable energy sources still give us a small portion of our total energy, and it's going to take a lot of time and investment to change that situation. Zero-point energy, yeah, I've been following that since the 1970s, and it's interesting, it's intriguing. I've seen a number of instances of fraud over the years of people claiming to have machines that produce energy out of nothing and don't really. So I've gotten pretty skeptical, I have to say. If something actually works, there's some interesting research going on now with what used to be called cold fusion. And actually, there are scientists working at a pretty high level that seem to be getting some positive results. Even if those results are verified, it doesn't mean we're out of the woods, because it takes decades to change the energy infrastructure of a society. So we'll need to move at warp speed to implement whatever new energy sources are available to us. And in the meantime, I think we're going to be stuck mostly with what we have, which means we're going to have to deal with high high prices of fossil fuels and energy in general for some time to come.
You know, as reading your book and adapting to our new economic reality, you know, the end of growth, where do you think we're headed from here? Like realistically, like what, do you have kids, Richard?
No, I don't.
Don't. I'm just wondering what would you tell some of the young people that are really growing up into a world that they're not adapted for at all?
Right.
Where do you think we're headed with all of this?
Well, I think we're headed into a really difficult time. You know, we've those of us who are, you know, in our 40s, 50s, 60s, have grown up in an era of stable economies, generally rapid economic growth, comfort and convenience, you know, massive entertainment options everywhere you look, and so on. Young people, I think, sense that all of that is changing, and that their lives are going to be fundamentally different. I think it's easy to be depressed when you first realize that, but at the same time, we're living on the cusp of a fundamental change in our economy, in really everything about how we live. Regardless of what new energy sources come online over the next few decades and how that shakes out, the reality is we are seeing the ending during our lifetimes of a whole paradigm of consumerism, of fossil fuel energy, and all of that, everything that implies. You know, the world of automobiles and cheap air travel and all the rest. So we're really going to be having to reinvent a lot of what it means to be human, our food system, our transport system, the buildings we live in, and our economy and more. So that's kind of exciting, actually, when you think about it. To be living in a generation that's actually going to reinvent human life on planet Earth. It's an invitation to let your imagination run wild. Why not create a world that works for everyone? Why not create a world in which other species really have a chance, and in which we humans have learned to live within natural limits once and for all?
Yeah, and I think we can do this, Richard, if we can let go of some of our primal tendencies of being territorial and aggressive, and all of this has to be transcended. I like what Einstein said, that we're never going to come up with the solutions to the problems from the same level of consciousness. I think we're looking at a possibility, a strong one, of a global shift of consciousness, because I really think, as you look back in history, we have been evolving consciously. But now it's a conscious evolution because we're taking part in it, which is the good news and the bad. But now that we've taken part in the evolution of consciousness on this planet, it involves a responsibility that we're really not used to. The responsibility to be more open and giving and compassionate and empathy and all of this, you know. So I think if we balance it out with the inner work, which I think more and more people are doing, you know, and align that with what we can do in the outer world, which brings me to another point. What do you think would safeguard a person's financial stability when we start going into this other realm of finances? Should we buy gold and silver, or what?
Yeah, I generally don't recommend that. First of all, I don't think going back to gold and silver for our monetary system would be a good idea, because in fact, during historical periods where we've had hard money, economic inequality has been pretty extreme, because it's so easy to, you know, glom onto the available metal, which is limited, gold or silver, and sit on it and hoard it. That's what generally happens during periods when we have hard money. Well, Uh, Having a little bit of gold and silver can be a hedge against hyperinflation, and maybe at some point we will see hyperinflation. Over the shorter period, I think it's more likely that we will see deflation like we saw in the 1930s. The reason I say that is that the problem that's facing us is an enormous debt and credit bubble that has only started to unwind. And as it does so, we will see effectively money evaporating. The money system we have is based on debt. Debt is money, money is debt. There's way too much debt in the world. That debt can never be repaid. So as that debt is defaulted upon, as it disappears, effectively that means that money is disappearing. That's what happened during the Great Depression. I think it's what's going to be happening over the next few years and maybe next decade or two. So how do you protect yourself in a deflationary depression? Well, cash is good, but even better is having skills, having tools, good hand tools, knowing how to use them, being more self-sufficient, having friends and neighbors that you can count on. Social capital is probably going to be much more important than having a 401k or an IRA or something like that as time goes on. So it's really the time now to be building that social capital, to be building community and bonds of trust with friends, neighbors, and family.
Yeah, even now, I would say probably 25% of our advertisement is barters and trades. And so we're already transforming ourselves into that kind of an arena. I know you're on a little bit of a time schedule, Richard. What would you like to say to the people as a final closing thought?
Sure. Well, we're headed for some hard times. There's no question about that. But we've been through hard times before, we human beings. And in some ways, hard times are useful for helping us test ourselves and change our assumptions. When people look back sometimes on like the Depression of the 30s, they see that really they were forced out of their comfort zone into becoming more generous and caring. A lot of people fear that in hard times people will just become more selfish and streets will be dangerous and so on. Well, you look at sociological and anthropological studies of what actually happens in natural disasters and hard times, and in many cases, most cases, it actually calls forth the best in people. So, in some ways, to use a time-worn phrase, the thing we have to fear the most is our own fears, our own imagination of what happens when things get bad. What we can be doing, what we should be doing, is not just preparing ourselves now with gold and guns and that sort of thing, but preparing our communities with more and more ways of interacting and supporting each other.
Well, that sounds like a good place to leave it, Richard. So we're looking forward to seeing you here in Chico, and thank you very much for this. And when you're here, I'll be sure to look you up.
I look forward to that. Thank you so much.
All right, Richard. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.